Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video, and it's a video we recorded last year, so I've made a couple of changes and wanted to make sure I'm super clear in this video. If you guys first of all do enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, hit that notification bell. And today we're covering the 2023 NBA Draft Combine winners and losers, guys who helped elevate their stock, maybe hurt their draft stock a little bit, and kind of how it's going to shape into this 2023 NBA draft, which I'm so excited for. We're going to have a lot of great content coming out about the NBA draft. So again, if you want to make sure you're catching up on all of the information here at Utility Sports, I'd make sure to hit that subscribe button. There's a lot of work that goes into these videos preparing to talk about all of these players at pretty good length and with pretty good intel and I think understanding of how their careers are going to play out. So I'm really excited. I hope you guys are as well. And let's jump into that video preview here now, where we're going to look at winners, which in this video, it means improved stock or risers, losers, which means they lowered their stock or their potential fallers from where they were currently projected in the NBA draft. This has nothing to do about their personalities. I'm not calling them actual losers. Okay. It's just draft combine losers. You have to think about it in one linear focus where we're just talking about their draft stock. Okay, these guys are all competing to fill out their dreams as NBA players. It's a pretty fantastic life to be living. Then you also look at the things that contribute to those winners or losers, and that's measurements, whether that means they measured in taller than we were expecting or maybe a little bit shorter than we were expecting. Also looking at their wingspan and some of their weight as well, that sometimes comes into effect. Obviously, drill performance is really important. How did they shoot the basketball? How did they look running and testing in a lot of these physical drills? And then also the 5-on-5 scrimmages is kind of the sweet spot when it comes to how we feel about these players, especially if they showed out well in live ball situations. There was not a very good turnout for the 5v5 scrimmages, which we'll talk about later on in this video. And then this comes in no specific order. Okay, so I have, quote unquote winner number one. That doesn't mean I think they're the biggest winner. I just think that they're one of the winners, and I didn't really have a clear spot with who to start, so I just decided to go in a kind of a random order, just however I kind of thought them through. And I spent a lot of time going through this, so I actually have 10 winners and a couple losers. Not that many losers, because overall I think that there was a pretty good combine this year, and I think a lot of players who did participate in the combine did a great job for themselves, kind of setting themselves up for success, and just really being, for the most part, really intriguing with the way that they tested. And I don't think there's a lot of players who really hurt their stock this year overall. So going into winner number one, Tristan Vukcevic here, who is kind of your typical modern overseas big because he's got a finesse style of play. He's able to knock down perimeter shots, and there were some question marks about where he would be in the draft. I think a lot of people, for the most part, have been looking at him as maybe a back end of the second round type of selection. And I definitely think he was one big winner in this year's draft combine for a few different reasons. One, he doesn't have a lot of tape, because you look at where he's playing, he kind of falls into that traditional, well, he's a talented player overseas, but he's young, so he doesn't really get a lot of playing time. Because of that, he doesn't put up any traditional stats, typically, compared to some of these other draft prospects. And then also because of that, there's just less film on him. So you have to be there in practice, and you kind of have to project some things. So seeing him live in drills, seeing him live in 5-on-5 scrimmages was huge, and he tested very well in pretty much every single thing he did this week in Chicago. 6'11" and a quarter without shoes on, so with shoes he'll be a natural 7-footer. He's got a plus wingspan at 7'2.5". He shot the ball really well. He finished in the top 10 in spot up shooting at 17 of 25, which is a very impressive mark for him. I believe that's 68%. So he shot the ball very well as a spot up guy, again, with good size. So you're looking at kind of a Brook Lopez type player. Obviously, Lopez didn't do that coming into the league. Vukcevic might be able to do that coming into the league as a guy who can be a big man floor spacer. Now, this doesn't necessarily rise his stock into the top 20 or anything crazy like that, but it probably moves him up toward the beginning of round 2, which is a pretty significant climb for him. I think a lot of people we're going to start seeing him mocked more so in the 30s than we were in the 40s or 50s like before, which I think is a pretty significant elevation. And that's exactly what you hope to do going to the draft combine. If you can move yourself up 10, 15, 20 slots in the draft, that's a massive win. Look at Jalen Williams last year from Santa Clara. Before the draft combine, I think a lot of people were looking at him as like a round 2 selection. Then the draft combine comes and he ends up going in the lottery. So we're seeing a pretty significant climb here from Vukcevic, and one that's very well deserved. He played very, very well in the scrimmage games, put the ball on the deck quite a bit, knocked down perimeter jump shots, and I think for the most part was very, very impressive for all of the scouts and executives in the building. And that's one thing I want to mention here. You want to know why the combine's so impressive? Yes, these players have 30 plus games of film and they've got a whole bunch of other meaningful play time throughout their either college careers or overseas careers. Part of the reason why it's so important is because every single scout, pretty much every single executive, is in the building watching these guys play. So if you want to formulate opinions and kind of shape the perspective around you, showing out this week is really, really, really important for kind of changing the narrative around you, changing the perception around you. And I think Tristan Vukcevic got the week started off pretty well for himself and ended up having a very good combine in totality. Which leads me to my second winner here, and this is one that I highlighted as someone who I thought was going to be a potential winner in Grant Nelson, and I think he impressed people in a lot of the ways that I was expecting, and that's the physicals. And all year long, I talk about how physicals really do shape the draft, especially toward the back end. To be honest, I think a lot of it's overreaction. I think that the game tape does show most of the things you need to know about a prospect. Of course, the physicals and some of the other things that come out later in the process at the combine are very important and very impressive, and sometimes do really showcase something that maybe you miss on film. But Grant Nelson's a complete combine type warrior. He's the type of guy that I just knew coming into this was going to impress people. He's 6'10" without shoes on, out of North Dakota State. Very rarely do we see a prospect from the NDSU Bison. At 7 foot wingspan as well, he's got a plus wingspan, so offers pretty good length size. We all know he's an incredible vertical leaper. There's no surprise that that's going to be a strength to his game if you've ever watched him play. Guy's a strong 2 foot leaper, jumps out of the gym. But I think the one thing that was super impressive for him from a physical standpoint that even I was not expecting, I think really rose some eyebrows for other people. I think a lot of eyebrows were raised because of this. He finished number 1 in the lane agility drill and was the only prospect at the entire combine to test with a sub 10-second mark in the pro lane agility drill, which is a very, very impressive number. And to be honest, if you're drafting off of upside in the second round, which beforehand I would have said that Grant Nelson's probably an undrafted free agency pickup, someone who maybe lands on a two-way deal, or maybe an Exhibition 9 or Exhibition 10 contract, Grant Nelson really did lift his ceiling up to a potential draft pick now. And it might not sound like a lot, but it really is. With 58 selections this year, if Grant Nelson could hear his name called as one of those 58, I think it would be a crazy turn of events from where we were 12 months ago, where basically 0 people within the NBA had Grant Nelson on their radar as a potential draft selection in the 2023 NBA draft. And nonetheless, he's definitely now going to get some type of two-way contract, I would presume. So this testing, even if it doesn't mean he gets drafted, does give him a legitimate chance at some point to play in the NBA and completely shift where his career was headed. And now I think he's at a really strong spot because of some really good testing. He was in phenomenal shape for the combine, which does tend to play itself out well for you. And as long as you interview well, you're setting yourself up for some decent success and building some good relationships with people inside the NBA. Winner number 3 here now, and this is Leonard Miller, someone who continues to climb for me. In my most recent mock draft on the channel, he actually went inside the lottery, which is a complete and utter change and difference from last year, where when he participated in the draft combine last year, I just could not take him as a serious prospect. He has really refined his game, taken some significant steps forward, and I think the G League Ignite program might highlight Leonard Miller as one of their greatest success stories when it's all said and done. He's a player who I think a lot of people were projecting to be a second-round draft pick this year. I myself was as well to begin the process. And now at this point, coming into this week, there was some significant buzz about him potentially moving up toward the lottery, and I think the way he tested was very, very impressive, especially on the physical standpoint. I think his film stands out for itself from the G League Ignite this year. As the year went on, he got better and better and better. But I think the big thing, the reason someone drafts Leonard Miller is for the upside, especially with the physicals that he possesses. At 6'9.25" without shoes on, he's one of the taller players in this year's draft class. And he plays at a pretty intriguing position as kind of a true power forward in today's NBA, with the way that the game is spaced, the amount of length and size you want on the wings. Leonard Miller fulfills all of those areas with a significantly positive wingspan. At 7'2". He's going to rebound the heck out of the basketball. I think he's got really, really good downhill capabilities as a scorer and slasher. And I think there's going to be a lot that he offers at the NBA level that a year ago I just did not see, because he was kind of playing more of this point guard type role and he was a little wild with the basketball in his hands. He's kind of transitioned now to more of a connector on offense and more of an off-ball player. And I think because of that, it's a lot easier to clearly see a fit for him in the league. And he was also just naturally a lot more productive in that type of role. So I think not only is Leonard Miller one of my big winners from the draft combine, he's been one of my big winners from this entire year. He has significantly helped his draft stock, probably more so than any other player throughout this season. There's only one other guy that I think really rivals him in that discussion. Winner number 4, Emoni Bates, another guy that I've been high on throughout the process. And like I said, this week has really vindicated a lot of my discussion throughout the draft this entire year. Every single mock draft, I swear I say, well, once we get to the draft combine portion, once we get to the individual workouts, this player's going to shine, this guy's going to do this. And Emoni Bates was one of those players for me. I talked about it all the time that, hey, he's a bigger player. He's got a lot to offer from a shot making perspective, and he really showcased it this week. And I'm really happy for Emoni Bates because, in my opinion, he is a surefire NBA player. He's somebody who I think has a very clear and defined role in the NBA, and it's always been about shooting. Somehow you go on Twitter and see people saying, "Oh, Emoni Bates isn't that good of a shooter," because they look at his shooting percentage in college. Yeah, look at the type of shots he takes. The combine put him in a role where he's going to find success, and I think a lot of GMs and executives were probably impressed by that. The question for him is, can he overcome a really tough freshman season at Memphis? And I think that this is a really good step in the right direction for that. For some reason, people just really cling on to Emoni Bates' freshman season as literal gospel, and I don't understand why, because his sophomore year was so much better and his freshman season was pretty comparable to Gigi Jackson's freshman season, and still people look at him as a potential lottery pick. So I think Emoni Bates is a big time sleeper in this draft. At 6'8.25" without shoes on, that's a very, very good size for a wing, especially when you consider how quick he is with the ball in his hands. In the combine scrimmages, he blew by guys consistently. I think his quickness with the ball in his hands was on full display, something I've talked about multiple times here on the channel. And he actually tested with a positive wingspan, which most people were questioning if that would be the case or not. He, for the most part, had been labeled as a guy with short arms, which is still kind of true. That 6'9" wingspan is not super impressive for his frame, but it's impressive based on what the narrative was around him, that he was going to likely test with a negative wingspan or at least a neutral wingspan. He actually tested semi-positive when it comes to the wingspan department. And look at the shooting splits here. 23 of 30 on the shooting off the dribble drill, also 17 of 25 in spot up shooting. So he finished top 10 in both of those, and he performed very well in the scrimmages as well, shooting fantastically from behind the three-point line. Like I said, getting to the rim pretty consistently and finishing at the rim, which was one of the big questions for him. I think Emoni Bates had a fantastic week. People are wondering now if he's going to be a first-round pick. My assumption is he's still a top of the second-round guy, but if a team does really like him at the end of the first round, maybe anywhere from pick 26 to 30, I could see a team pulling the trigger, especially a team like the Los Angeles Clippers, who currently own the 30th pick in this year's draft. Winner number 5, and this is another player I highlighted pre-combine as a guy who I knew was going to blow away the draft combine. I've been significantly higher on him than pretty much everyone else the entire year, and that's Brandin Podziemski, and he blew people away, and to me it wasn't that surprising. He's a big-time winner for me, and there's nothing he did that I thought he couldn't do. The top 10 in the max vertical jump is what I think is going to make a lot of people go, whoa, They weren't quite expecting that from him. And to be honest, I don't really understand how. He was averaging almost 9 rebounds a game in college despite being a guard. Okay, you don't just get those by being lucky. You have to be either one, a really good natural rebounder, which I think he is, and secondly, you have to have some physical tools to back that up. He's not the biggest player, but he does go out and get the basketball, and a lot of that is because he jumps relatively high. I think he's a pretty solid athlete. Not a great athlete, but a solid athlete, and I think the vertical attests to that here, finishing top 10 in the combine in that regard. He was first in the side shooting drill at 21 of 30, which is a 70% mark. Very impressive numbers from him there. And he showed out in the scrimmages too. I think Brandin Podziemski had a fantastic week, impacted the game in multiple ways during scrimmages, finishing with double-digit scoring outputs, finishing with 5+ assists in some of the scrimmage games, and then also rebounding the basketball again very, very effectively. He just kind of filled up the traditional stats, and doing that in the combine is a way to make yourself stand out. Pushed the ball well in transition, found Emoni Bates actually a couple times in transition as well. They were actually teammates during a scrimmage game. So both Podziemski, Emoni Bates, they were connecting on multiple occasions, and I think both of them big-time winners, but especially Brandin Podziemski, a guy who I said was going to blow away the combine, and he 100% did. And I think he solidifies himself as a first-round selection, and honestly a guy who might climb into the top 16, maybe lottery range for this year's draft, honestly. Winner number 6, Dillon Mitchell, and not really a lot behind Dillon Mitchell in terms of how he performed in drills, and he didn't really test in a lot of the measurement categories, but he's still a big-time winner for me because he got in the gym in front of a lot of executives, a lot of decision makers, and he shot the basketball. And not only did he shoot it, he shot it surprisingly really well. And you guys know here on the channel, I have consistently put Dillon Mitchell in the first round, saying that I believe he's still a first-round player. I know a lot of people sold some stock on him and said, oh, how does he fit in the league? He doesn't shoot threes, what this, that, and the other thing. First of all, you don't need every player on the court to shoot the basketball. Look at the Golden State Warriors. They've won 4 of the last 8 championships before this year's finals. And they had Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, and Andrew Bogut as their front court players for a vast majority of that duration. Now, obviously, they do have Steph and Clay. You need guys who can shoot, but it doesn't have to be all 5 players. Dillon Mitchell, I think, could have fit in the NBA really well, even without developing a jump shot, but his refined shot mechanics, to me, make him a significant winner here in the NBA draft combine. I think he's going to be somebody who does go in the first round for sure. Now, tested pretty well physically in terms of some of the measurements at 6'6" and 3/4 without shoes on. He's got the typical wing size. When he's wearing shoes, he'll be around 6'8", and then he's got that 6'10" wingspan, which is a pretty solid plus wingspan. Everyone knows that if you turn on the Dillon Mitchell film, if you turn on highlights specifically, you're going to see this guy jumping out of the gym. He's going to have one of the best vertical jumps in the entire draft class. Did not participate in that because he didn't want to hurt his stock, really. If he just doesn't test very well in a vertical jump, it does hurt his stock there, so he decided to not do that. I think that makes complete and total sense. And he's now in a position where he's really bolstered his stock, and I think solidified himself as a first-round pick and a player that a lot of teams are going to have significant interest in from this combine. I think Dillon Mitchell really helped himself a lot. A player that I'm in love with. I think he can be a better Jared Vanderbilt, and that's a really good player in today's league. Winner number 7, Jordan Walsh, and I don't think a lot of people would be expecting to see him in this video, but the reason I highlighted Jordan Walsh as a winner here for me, he tested very similarly to Ryan Rupert, a player who I think some people have looked at as a potential lottery pick. I know I have discussed that as well with some people, and I think that's a realistic possibility that Rupert goes in the lottery. But to be honest, when Jordan Walsh is out there, I think Jordan Walsh is a very similar prospect to Ryan Rupert, and I think he's been slept on throughout most of this process. Ryan Rupert tested at 6'6" without shoes and a 7'2" wingspan. Walsh, 6'5" 3/4 and 7'1" 3/4 wingspan, basically the same measurements, right? A little bit smaller, a little bit less lengthy, but for the most part, still very, very similar. Oh, and by the way, he finished top 10 inside mid-side shooting drill, which I think is very surprising. Now, he finished toward the back end of that top 10, so it's not something that you're going to say, oh, well, we're banking on that. It's kind of more of a, hey, he had a good day here. but I do think that helps him, and it is notable. Now, there's still a lot of flaws to Jordan Walsh's game. I'm not saying that he's going to be a top 20 pick or anything like that. Ryan Rupert will be drafted before Jordan Walsh, but I do think that maybe he climbs up to the back end of the first round, or at least becomes a high second round pick, because there's a lot of things Jordan Walsh does do really, really well. He runs in transition. He's a very active player on both offense and defense. He's a cutter, and defensively, he's going to become, I think, a pretty good point of attack defender in the NBA. He's quick. He's going to be about 6'7" with shoes on in the NBA, so he's got the typical wing size. He's going to be versatile. You're going to be able to match him up on point guards. You're going to be able to match him up on small forwards and maybe even some power forwards. He's going to be versatile. Someone who guards 1 through 3, 1 through 4 in the NBA makes a lot of sense. He's got the physical frame to do so. He's quick enough to stay in front of guards. And because of that, I think Jordan Walsh is not only a big winner from this draft combine, but somebody that we do have to keep our eyes on as a potential NBA draft sleeper as well. Winner number 8 here, Seth Lundy. And talk about a player who really elevated his stock. Now, if I did put these in order, Seth Lundy maybe would have been first on the entire list, because he had himself a week in Chicago. 6'4" without shoes on. You might not say, well, that's super impressive, because it's really not. 6'4", kind of your typical size here for a guard. Oh, but by the way, he has a 6'10" plus wingspan, which is a huge positive. That's fantastic positive wingspan compared to his height. Of course, not a surprise if you've watched him play at Penn State. And he's a top 10 in a variety of drills this week. Top 10 in the shuttle run at 3.04 seconds. Finished top 5 in the 3-quarter sprint, which is not fully indicative of being a good player or not. You think back to when Mo Bamba kind of blew away the combine. Sometimes, there's combine warriors who just don't end up lasting in the NBA anyway. But Seth Lundy does have a skill that I think a lot of teams would have interest in adding to their team, especially in the second round, and that is shooting. He shoots the ball very well off the dribble, 25 of 30 in the drill this week, which finished first at an 83.3% mark, and he scrimmaged well. He backed it up by performing pretty well in the scrimmages, knocking down some perimeter jump shots, and doing some really nice things in those scrimmages. So for me, he was a big-time winner, somebody who probably before this week was looked at mostly as an undrafted player, a guy who would have maybe gotten a 2-way deal, but more than likely would have been more of an exhibition 10 type contract where he's getting brought in for a training camp, and if he performs well there, then maybe he gets a 2-way deal. Now I think Seth Lundy probably draws a pretty high interest for being a 2-way contract player, and somebody who really did help his stock out a lot this draft combine. Number 9, we have Mojave King here from G League Ignite, and he helped himself significantly as well. The only reason Seth Lundy's not a clear number 1 is because Mojave King might have been that guy as well. He finished second in the max vertical jump at 42 inches, which is a significant leaping capability. Think about Cam Whitmore, who's one of the best leapers in this year's draft. Mojave King posted a max vertical jump that was 1.5 inches higher than Cam Whitmore's vertical jump. He also tested at 6'3" and 3/4 without shoes, but again, another positive wingspan here at 6'8". Oh, and by the way, he finished top 10 inside mid-side shooting off the dribble, shuttle run, and 3/4 sprint drills. So there's 5 drills that he finished top 10 in if you include the max vertical jump. He had a fantastic week for himself. Honestly, throughout the year for G League Ignite, continued to take steps forward. He can shoot the basketball, which is one of the most important things. I think his leaping was a surprise for a lot of people, including myself. I just didn't expect him to test that well, and because of that, I think he's really become a name that's going to be considered a lot more in the second round, and maybe even higher second round, just because of the physical tools that he possesses, and he's still relatively young. So I think he's going to be a player that a lot of people do have their eyes on moving forward in this process, which is a good win for him. And the whole point of competing in the draft combine is to hopefully elevate your stock like Mojave King did for his this week. Then winner number 10, and I'd be smiling like this too if I had the week that he had. Olivier-Maxence Prosper out of Marquette had a great week for himself. Didn't really impress as much in terms of the pure height at 6'6" and 3/4. I think there was hopes that he'd be a little bit bigger, maybe around that 6'7.5" to 6'8.5" range, but he will be kind of in that range with shoes on. He did post a 7'1" wingspan though, so significant length compared to his size. Oh, and by the way, he blew away all of the drills. 40.5-inch max vertical, which was tied with Cam Whitmore for third. Seventh in the shuttle run at 3.0 seconds, so he's very, very mobile, despite being kind of a bigger prospect with a lot of length. Fourth in the pro lane drill, 10.59 seconds. Again, let's flash back to Grant Nelson quick, who finished first at under 10 seconds. You see why his testing was so impressive. This was fourth, 10.59, so over half a second faster for the number one guy, which is pretty crazy. But then also, not only did he test well, but he had fantastic scrimmage games, including a 21-point performance, which also had 7 rebounds. He was a big-time plus player in that game as well, if you look at his plus-minus from the scorecard. Maxence Prosper was a really, really big-time winner this draft combine, and I'm very happy for him because he set himself up in a position to not only potentially be drafted, but be a really high priority for a team to add in the second round if that's possible. Now, there's always times like a guy like Darian Sebron from last year, who I thought was a big draft combine winner. He still went undrafted and then ended up catching on with Charlotte, I believe, on a 2-way deal. It's possible that something like that happens with Olivier-Maxence Prosper. Performing well in the combine does not guarantee you a draft selection. Okay, it really doesn't. But again, if we're talking about this from a pure, did this guy win or lose? Did he help his draft stock throughout the combine? 110% he did, and that's why he was highlighted as a winner for me here. And let's take an overall look just back, a quick flashback at our winners. We had Tristan Vukcevic, Grant Nelson, Leonard Miller, Emoni Bates, Brandin Podziemski, Dillon Mitchell, Jordan Walsh, Seth Lundy, Mojave King, and Olivier-Maxence Prosper. Again, a really good list. 10 players who helped themselves a lot. There's a lot of players on this in this combine that I did not mention. Okay, a guy like Amari Bailey really helped himself a lot. I think Grady Dick had a pretty good combine for himself. For the most part, a lot of players I think performed extremely well at the draft combine this year. So this is not a complete and total list. These are 10 guys that I really wanted to highlight, guys who I thought had really great combines for themselves. If I had to rank them, these would be my top 10. Again, not in this order or anything, but this would be my top 10. So I think it's a pretty complete list. Now, it's not a total list because there's guys who did do very, very well outside of these players. But for the most part, these were the 10 guys that stuck out the most to me compared to what I was expecting from them. Now let's get into the losers. I have 3 different losers from this weekend, and one of them, Mike Miles Jr. And it's a bummer because Mike Miles out of TCU is a really, really good player. You think back to when Chet Holmgren and Team USA U19 for FIBA won the World Championship. He was a key part of that team. Was actually the starting point guard for that team. Played alongside Jaden Ivey and Chet Holmgren, Kenneth Lofton, some really notable names. Mike Miles was a really good player on that team, one of the better players actually on that roster. Also played with Patrick Baldwin on that team. So there's notable guys who are drafted in the first round. Mike Miles, however, though, despite being a really good player, will not be a first-round pick and might not even be a draft pick at all, honestly, which I hate to say because I think he's impactful. I think he's a pretty solid player. I think he does a lot of nice things with the ball in his hands. I think he can knock down shots and play the game the right way. But remember, the draft combine is all about physicals and kind of proving some things, and Mike Miles just didn't really do that this week, unfortunately. Tested under 6'1" in terms of height. Tested with a negative wingspan despite being the shortest player at the combine outside of, of course, there's Marcus Noel as well. But Mike Miles, like really, really small, right? Under 6'1", negative wingspan, tested decently for speed and quickness. But again, if you're going to be the shortest player in the draft, you probably want to be toward the very, very top when it comes to both speed and quickness. He was not toward the top for either of those. He is a very good player, but I just do not think the combine hurt him. Again, he's at a fantastic spot still in his career. He has a chance to be an NBA player. Worst case, he's going to be a high-end pro player for another league somewhere else in the world, or he would be a very good G League player pretty quickly into his time in the G League. So I don't think Mike Miles is a loser, quote unquote. I just think he lost the draft combine because his stock fell. For the most part, though, Mike Miles still an intriguing player, someone who I believe in still as an individual player, but you just have to admit that the combine was not the best tool for him to improve his stock this year. Loser number 2, Azuolas Tubelis, and I think this was kind of a surprise for a lot of people, but not really for me. I've just never been an Azuolas Tubelis guy. I think a lot of people looked at him as a high second-round pick this year. I just never really saw that, though. And for me, nothing really popped about him this week. He has solid size, solid length, but nothing crazy. And I think A guy like Tristan Vukcevic, who we highlighted as a winner, completely overshadowed Azuolas Tubelis this week, because a lot of things that Tristan Vukcevic did were things that Azuolas Tubelis was supposed to do this week. His physicals were middling. He's 3 inches shorter than Tristan Vukcevic. He's got a smaller wingspan than Vukcevic, and he didn't really pop from the skill set side of things. Now, I think he's a very good player. He had a really nice couple seasons at Arizona for the Wildcats there, but his scrimmages didn't really showcase that. He was pretty quiet, had some nice plays, but didn't really stand out as like a, wow, this guy's really, really, really good in a gym of a lot of very good players. He didn't pop. And if you're not going to have the physicals pop, and your length and size isn't great, and there's questions about your defense, and you're still quiet in scrimmages, to me, it's going to really hurt your draft stock. And I think a lot of people probably have more questions about Tubelis now than they did, say, a month ago. And because of that, I think he does hurt his stock here a little bit. Again, not a loser. He probably still has a chance of getting drafted. Now, I think it's possible that he doesn't go that route and goes a different direction in his career, but this week did not help him. I'm going to be very frank about that. He just did not have a good week for himself, and because of that, he's my second loser, which leads me into our final loser here, and it's the fans. Loser number 3 is us. And the reason why, 37 prospects did not participate in the combine scrimmages. And you might say, oh, well, that's whatever. That's what typically happens. I know that's what typically happens, and that's a problem, okay? A bunch of guys did not compete. For example, Jordan Hawkins, Julian Phillips, Julian Strother, Keontae George, Kobe Brown, Kobe Buffkin, Chris Murray, Leonard Miller did not. Adem Bona, Amen Thompson, Ausar Thompson, Anthony Black, Bryce Sensabaugh, Cam Whitmore, Grady Dick, Dariq Whitehead, Derek Lively, Gigi Jackson, Jaime Jaquez even did not, which I think is a really big mistake, by the way. Maxwell Lewis, Marcus Sasser, Chris Murray, Noah Clowney, Nick Smith Jr., C.D. Sissoko, Ryan Rupert, Taylor Hendricks, Trace Jackson Davis, Zach Edey. All of those guys did not compete. I think that's a significant loss for fans, and I think it does hurt some of these young guys as well. They're getting guidance from their agents, they're getting some guidance from other people around them, and sometimes I think that guidance is wrong. Remember, there's 30 first-round picks, and 37 guys decided that, no, I don't really need to compete in these scrimmages. Getting out and competing can really help you. I think Brandin Podziemski and Emoni Bates are 2 great examples of that, and there's going to be players that do pass these guys up because they did not participate in the scrimmages. That's just the honest truth about it. It happens every single year. Jaden Hardy did not compete in scrimmages last year, fell to pick 37 in the draft before the Mavericks ultimately stopped his slide by trading up with the Kings to go get him. And it was a phenomenal pick, but there's a reason players fall. And it's because they don't compete, they don't go out and participate. And it sends a message to executives and GMs that, oh, maybe they don't want to go out there and just play basketball. To me, I don't think that way myself. I understand the rationale, because a lot of these players have 30 plus games of game tape that, you know, scouts could have been at in person and watched them play already. But at the same time, I would like to see them play just for a pure entertainment perspective. It's fun watching these players compete against each other and show out, and I think it would turn the draft combine into an even better event going forward. So I think that's really my biggest loser of the entire draft combine is us, because we don't get to see the Thompson twins play in scrimmages against other draft prospects, which I think would have been a really telling situation, which is why when they're projected top 5, top 10 picks, they don't go out there and compete, because they have nothing really to gain and a lot to lose in case they play really poorly. But really, I don't think that it's going to play out that way for these guys. I think just getting out there and competing, you know, these combine scrimmages are important. They're not everything. I think executives and scouts know that. But nonetheless, I think we're big losers because we didn't get to see these guys compete to the best of their abilities this week. And it's a real shame, honestly. So my overall losers, Mike Miles, Azuolas Tubelis, and us as fans. So again, like I said, not a lot of losers. I think for the most part, this draft combine had a lot of winners, a lot of guys who bolstered their stock or at least solidified their stock. There's a couple of guys that I think just did not test very well and didn't really set themselves up to gain notoriety this week, unfortunately. Again, not overall losers, but just draft stock losers. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I had a lot of fun recording this type of video. The draft combine does go a long way in shaping our perception and our perspective on these players, and I think for the most part we have a really good overall picture now on where these players might go. We're going to start getting to the point where players go to teams for one-on-one workouts and individual stuff, and that's going to even more so shape my draft board and my mock drafts than where we're currently at. So I'm really excited for the future here on Utility Sports. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.